What happens to a person on the day the whole world decides she is not worth keeping? Ellen Mercer found out on a Friday in July, sitting in a borrowed car outside a boarded-up firehouse with $61 to her name and nowhere on earth she was expected. She was 53 years old. She had a suitcase in the trunk, a gas tank that read 1/4 full, and a folded letter from a county office telling her that the building in front of her had been condemned and would come down on Monday morning. She did not cry. She had done all of that already, in motel parking lots and in the front seats of cars, in the long, slow months after Harlan died and his family made it plain that she was a stranger they intended to forget. Grief has a bottom to it, and she had found hers somewhere back on the highway. What she felt now was only tired. She wanted to sign the paper, hand over the key, take whatever pennies the scrap man would give her for the old fire engine, and be gone before the sun came up again. She had it all planned, in the small, careful way that broke people plan the little that is left to them. She had telephoned a scrap dealer 2 towns over from a gas station payphone, and he had said the old pumper might bring $300 for the brass and the steel if she could have it ready by Monday, and Monday was the day the county had told her the wrecking crew would come for the building itself. So it lined up neat and grim as a row of nails. Sign the developer's paper tonight. Let the scrap man haul the engine away over the weekend, stand aside Monday morning while the walls came down, and drive off with the developer's money and the scrap money folded together into the closest thing to a future she could imagine. 3 days. That was the whole of her plan, and it was a plan for erasing a thing, not for keeping it. And some tired part of her had believed that erasing was all she had strength left to do. The town was called Coburn, and it was dying the slow way that mill towns die. The great brick-spinning mill down by the river had closed when Ellen was still a young woman, and everything that depended on it had gone quiet in the years since. Half the storefronts on Main Street wore plywood in their windows. The traffic light at the center of town blinked yellow in every direction, warning no one about nothing. It was the kind of place people drove through with their doors locked, feeling sorry without knowing exactly for what. And on the corner of Water Street in Maine, squat and stubborn in the July heat, stood the old volunteer firehouse. It was not a grand building. It had never tried to be. It was a single story of weathered red brick, darkened at the top where 70 years of engine smoke had climbed the wall. One tall arched bay door faced the street, its paint peeling in long curls the color of old blood. Above the bay, someone had lettered, by hand and long ago, the words Coburn Volunteer Fire Company, and the paint of the letters had faded until they were more shadow than color. Higher still, on the roof line, a small white cupola held a bell, and beside the cupola stood a short square hose tower, the kind where the men had once hung their canvas hoses to dry. Weeds pushed up through the cracked concrete apron out front. Ivy had taken one corner of the building and was working patiently on the rest. On the brick beside the bay door, in letters smaller and older than the company name, you could still make out 4 words: "We answer every call." Ellen sat and looked at it for a long time. She had married into this building without ever quite understanding it. Harlan Mercer had been a quiet man, a mechanic by trade, and for the 40 years of his grown life he had been a volunteer with the Coburn Company. It had seemed to her, when she was young and impatient, like a strange thing to give a life to. There was no pay in it. There was no glory in a town this small. He would rise at 2 in the morning when the bell rang and come home at dawn smelling of smoke and say almost nothing about where he had been. When he died last winter, his own brother had stood at the graveside and said, within her hearing, that Harlan had wasted himself on a town that never gave him a thing back. That brother, Dale Mercer, was the reason Ellen had a letter in her lap now instead of a home. When Harlan died, it had come out that the small house they rented had never been theirs, and that the only thing Harlan had actually owned in all the world was this firehouse. He had bought it from the town for a single $1, years ago, when the county tried to close the volunteer company and sell the building out from under it. Dale had expected the house. Dale had expected savings. When there was nothing but a dead firehouse on a demolition list, he had turned on Ellen as though she had hidden the money herself, and the rest of the Mercers had closed their doors to her one by one. So here she was, abandoned at 53, with $61, holding the key to the one thing nobody in the family had wanted. She got out of the car. The heat came up off the pavement in a wave. She crossed the cracked apron, stepping over a fist of wildflowers that had forced its way up through the concrete, and she fit the old iron key into the side door beside the bay. The door stuck, then gave. Inside, the air was cool and still and smelled of dust, of engine oil, of something faintly like the inside of a church. Light came in through the round-topped windows in long, dusty bars. And there, filling most of the single room, sat the engine. It was an old pumper, red once, faded now to the color of brick, its brass fittings gone dull and green. It had not moved in years. Ellen walked around it slowly, trailing one hand along the cold metal, and she thought about the scrap man and about the brass going off in a truck for its weight, and her hand slowed on the engine and came to a stop. She had come to sell this for its weight. Somehow, in the cool and the quiet, that felt smaller and meaner than it had felt on the highway. At the back of the room, up 3 worn wooden steps, was a smaller space they had called the watchroom. It had a narrow bed, a wooden desk, a coal stove gone cold, and a single window that faced out onto Water Street. And on the wall above the desk, black iron and heavy, hung the old fire bell. Not the big bell up in the cupola, but the inside bell. The one that had rung down here in the men's ears when a call came in. Ellen looked at it. It was ugly and plain and enormous, and there was something behind it. She could see, where the bell hung a little away from the wall, that the plaster there was not plaster at all but a panel of wood fitted so carefully into the brick that you would never see it unless you were standing exactly where she stood, in exactly this bar of afternoon light. She reached toward it. Then she stopped. Outside, a car door slammed. Boots crossed the apron, and a man's voice, smooth and unhurried, called through the open side door. "Anybody home in the museum?" Ellen came back down the steps. A man stood silhouetted in the bright doorway, tall, well-dressed for the heat, holding a leather folder against his chest. Behind him, out on the street, a silver truck idled with the company name painted on its door. Meridian Land Partners. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, and put out a hand she did not take. "Alan Price. I've been trying to reach you for 2 months. I'm glad you finally came. You're the developer. I'm the solution." He smiled with the ease of a man who had said the line many times and still liked it. He looked around the room, at the engine, at the dust, and he did not bother to hide what he thought of it. "I'll be honest with you, because I think you're a practical woman, and I don't think this town has given you much reason to be sentimental. That building is coming down Monday whether you and I ever shake hands or not. The county has it on the list. It's a hazard. The roof's half gone in the back." He opened the folder. "What I can do is make sure you don't walk away from it empty. I've got the whole corner under contract but this parcel. Sign this, tonight, and I put $4,000 in your hand before you leave town." $4,000. Ellen felt the number land in her body like a warm coat dropped over her on a cold night. $4,000 was gas and rent and food. $4,000 was a floor under her, the first floor she'd had in half a year. Monday, she said. Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Price set the folder on the hood of the old engine and clicked a pen. 3 days. After that, the county does it for free, and you get nothing but a bill for your share of the hauling. "I'm not the villain here, Mrs. Mercer. I'm the only man in Coburn willing to give you a dime for a pile of brick nobody wants." Her gaze dropped to the pen. She looked at the 4 words fading on the outside wall, framed in the bright doorway behind him. "We answer every call. I'll read it tonight," she said. "I'll sign it in the morning." Something crossed his face, quick and gone, and she understood that he had wanted it signed now, in the heat, before she thought too hard. But he smiled again and capped the pen. Morning, then. Don't let the sentiment get to you overnight. It's just a building. He left the folder. His truck pulled away, and the room went quiet again, and the dust settled back down through the bars of light. Ellen stood alone a long moment. Then, she climbed the 3 steps back to the watchroom, and she reached behind the heavy iron bell, and she found the edge of the wooden panel with her fingernails, and she pulled. It came away in her hand. Behind it was a shallow space in the wall, no deeper than her forearm, that Harlan had built himself. She knew his work as surely as she knew his own handwriting. The joints were clean and close, the little shelf inside sanded smooth. And on the shelf sat a book. It was thick, bound in cracked black leather, the corners worn pale. It was the kind of book a company keeps to log its calls, and on the cover, in Harlan's blocky, careful hand, was written a single word: answered. Ellen carried it to the desk and sat down and opened it under the window light. The first page was dated 40 years back. The first entry was 4 lines long in a younger, rounder version of the hand she knew. Tuesday, chimney fire, the Ostrowski place on River Road. Put it out by 2. Old flue, cracked all down one side, they can't afford the mason. Fixed it Saturday with peaty and a load of fire brick off my own truck. Won't burn again. Didn't tell them what the brick cost. She read it twice. It was not, she realized, a log of fires. Or it was, but it was also something underneath the fires. Something the county form never asked for, and Harlan had written down anyway. She turned the page. Winter, the Dawes family lost the whole back of the house. Faulty heater, 4 kids. Company put it out, but the house is done. Cold coming. Nobody's insuring a place like that. Started rebuilding the back room Sunday, us and whoever shows up. Charging them nothing. A house you put out is only half saved if the family freezes in it come January. And the next. Bad one on Cutler Street. Total loss. Got everyone out, thank God. The Reyes family sleeping in the truck. Brought them into the bay tonight. All 5. Blankets and the coal stove going. Marie made a pot of something. They'll stay till we get them somewhere. Nobody sleeps in a truck in my town while there's a warm floor under this roof. Ellen sat very still. She turned the pages slowly now, and 40 years of Coburn rose up out of them and stood in the little room around her. Here was a fire, and then, below it, always below it, the other thing. The family put back on its feet. The roof reframed before the snow, the chimney rebuilt for a widow who could not pay, the stranded bus passengers bedded down in the engine bay on Christmas Eve when the highway closed. Names she half knew. Names she had never heard. Year after year of them, in Harlan's steady hand, and not one word of it had he ever spoken to her across their supper table. He had come home smelling of smoke and said it was a long night, and it had been this. All of this. She understood, sitting there, why the book had no talk of money in it and no talk of thanks. He had not kept it to be repaid. He had kept it because someone should. Because a town that is dying forgets what held it up. And he had wanted, she thought, for there to be one honest record somewhere that it had been held up at all. She kept reading, and the entries came at her like rungs on a ladder, each one lower and closer to the heart of the man than the last. A page near the middle stopped her cold. It was dated a February she remembered, because it was the winter her own mother had been sick, and Ellen had spent it 3 states away at a bedside, and she had come home to find Harlan thin and quiet, and had thought only that he had missed her. Widow Hall out on the county road, the entry read. 3rd winter alone, her chimney's shot, and she's been running the range for heat with the flue half blocked, which is how you die 2 ways at once, fire or the bad air. She won't ask anybody for a thing. Proud. So I told her the company was required by law to inspect chimneys in this district, which is a lie, and I inspected it, and I condemned it, which gave me the excuse to rebuild it. which I did over 4 Saturdays so it wouldn't look like charity. Charity a proud woman can't take. A rule she can. A man just has to be willing to be the rule. Ellen laughed out loud in the empty room, a wet and startled sound. Because it was so exactly him. The quiet ingenuity of his kindness, a whole life spent sneaking help in through side doors so that nobody would have to feel small taking it. She had lived with that man for 29 years and never once caught him at it. He had been that careful. Then, the winter of the bad ice storm, the one the whole state remembered, the one that put the highway under a sheet of glass for 3 days. Storms got the interstate closed both ways. State police turning cars off at the Coburn exit, and there's no motel for 40 miles that isn't full. So, I opened the bay. 41 people tonight, strangers every one, a busload of them and a family from Ohio with a baby and 2 truckers who'd have frozen their cabs. Marie and the diner sent soup. Old Man Petey played the harmonica till midnight. A little girl asked me was this a shelter, and I said no, honey, it's a firehouse, we just answer whatever comes. She asked what if nothing's on fire. I told her a person can be froze and scared and lost, and that's a kind of fire too, the kind you put out with a warm floor and a light left on. She went to sleep on that. 41 souls under this roof tonight, and not one of them a soul I knew this morning. Ellen read that one 3 times. 41 strangers. She thought of the little square engine bay downstairs, cold and empty now with its one dead pumper, and she tried to fill it in her mind with 41 people and a harmonica and a pot of soup and a child asking what you do when nothing is on fire, and the picture was so warm and so full that the emptiness of the real room downstairs became almost unbearable. She read until the light in the round window went from gold to gray, and she did not think once about the $4,000. The last quarter of the book she came to slowly was different. The entries grew shorter as the years wore on. The men grew old. Petey died. The company shrank until it was 3 men, then 2, then at the end, 1, and through all of it, night after night, in the same 3 words, again and again down the final pages. Harlan had written the same small line, lit the lamp. She did not understand it at first, and then she came to the entry where it began. And she did. It was dated a long way back, near the start, and it was longer than the others, and the hand was unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with age. Bad night, it read. Call came at 3. House out past the crossing, and we were slow, the truck wouldn't turn over in the cold, and we lost 10 minutes fighting it. And 10 minutes is the whole world. By the time we got there, it was too far gone. We got the parents out. We did not get the boy. He was up in the back room, and we could not reach him, and I will hear it the rest of my life. His father said afterward the boy was scared of the dark, always slept with a lamp lit, and that night the power was out in the storm, and the lamp was cold, and the boy woke up in the black and nobody came. I keep thinking if there'd been one light. Just one light somewhere he could see. Something to tell him the world hadn't ended, and somebody was still awake and coming. I can't give that boy his light, so I am going to light one here. In this window, every night I live, and I don't care if it's foolish. Somebody out there is scared in the dark tonight, and every night, and they are going to look out a window, and they are going to see that this one is still burning. That's the promise. That's the only apology I've got. Ellen set the book down on the desk and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and sat that way for a long time. She understood now why he had never spoken of it. Some things a man does not carry out into the light of a supper table. He carries them into a dark window and turns them into a lamp. Every night for 40 years her husband had lit a small flame in a small window as penance. For 10 minutes he could not get back, and she had never once known, And she thought of all the evenings she had been annoyed that he wandered off to the firehouse after dark instead of sitting with her. And she forgave him for it in the same breath that she broke her heart over it. She turned to the last entry he had ever made, dated the winter he died, in a hand gone thin and shaky. Cold snap coming. Nobody left to ring the bell but me. Lit the lamp anyway. As long as one window in this town stays awake, nobody who's scared out there in the dark has to feel like the last soul alive. That's the whole of it. That's all I ever figured out worth knowing. Somebody has to be the window that stays lit. Ellen looked up from the book. Across the watchroom, on the desk under the street window, sat an old oil lamp. Its glass chimney smoked gray, its wick burned down to a black curl. She had not noticed it until now. She understood, all at once, what it was, and why it sat in that exact window and no other. And she put her hand over her mouth, and she wept. Not the empty crying of the parking lots, but something with a bottom that gave way beneath it into somewhere deeper. She stayed the night in the firehouse. She had meant to find a motel. Instead, she lay on the narrow watchroom bed with the book against her chest. And she did not sleep so much as keep company with the little room. Sometime after midnight she got up, found a can of lamp oil in the cabinet under the stove, trimmed the black curl off the wick with the desk scissors, filled the reservoir, and set a match to it. The flame caught and steadied. A warm circle of light bloomed in the window that faced Water Street, the first light that window had held in a year and a half. Ellen sat beside it, and she watched the empty street, and she thought about the paper on the engine hood downstairs with a pen laid across it, and she thought, for the first time in a very long time, about something other than getting out. She had nearly fallen asleep in the chair when she heard it, a slow, uncertain shuffle out on the apron, and then a soft, confused knocking at the side door. Low down, as though whoever it was had knocked with the flat of a hand rather than a knuckle. She went down the 3 steps with her heart in her throat. When she opened the door, there stood an old man in a cardigan and slippers. No coat, his white hair wild, and he was shaking, and he did not know where he was. The light was on, he said. His voice trembled. I saw the light. I've been walking, and everything was dark, and I couldn't find my... He stopped, lost, and his eyes filled. I don't know where my house is. I don't know how I got out here. Come inside, Ellen said. Come in out of the dark. You found it. You found the right place. She brought him into the watchroom and sat him in the chair by the lamp and put a blanket from the bed around his shoulders, and slowly, in the warm light, he steadied. His name was Amos, he managed, and after a while he remembered a street, and Ellen found a phone book gone soft, with age in the desk drawer, and matched the street to a name, and called it, and a frightened, sleepless daughter answered on the first ring and burst into tears when she heard he was safe. She had been driving the streets for 2 hours. He wandered at night now, she said. She had turned her back for 10 minutes. While they waited for the daughter's car, Amos looked around the little room, at the bell and the book and the lamp, and something cleared in his face. I know this place, he said. The Firehouse. Mercer's Firehouse. He nodded slowly. When I was a boy, my father's shop caught, the whole front of it, and it was Mercer. No, that'd be the father or the... He waved a shaking hand at the tangle of years. A Mercer, anyhow, and they had it out, and then they came back, and they built the front of the shop again. And my father tried to pay, and the man wouldn't take it. Wouldn't take a dime. He looked at Ellen, and for a moment his eyes were perfectly clear. The light was always on here. My whole life. You could always see it from the road. I think that's why I came. Even lost, a body remembers where the light was. When the daughter arrived and gathered her father up with shaking hands and thanked Ellen over and over, Ellen stood in the doorway and watched their taillights go, and then she turned and looked back up at the lamp burning in the window, small and steady in gold, and she understood that she had just done the thing the book was full of. Not planned. Not paid. Just answered, because a light was on and someone in the dark had needed it to be. She did not sleep the rest of that night. She sat by the lamp and she thought, and by the time the sky went pale over the mill she knew. In the morning, she did not sign. She drove to the county building on the town square instead, the book on the seat beside her, and she asked at a scarred wooden counter to see everything on file for the Firehouse parcel. The clerk was a thin patient woman named Ruth Colby, who had worked that counter for 30 years, and when Ellen said which building she meant, Ruth's face changed. "Harlan Mercer's place," Ruth said. "You're his wife." "His widow." She said it gently. "That building put my mother's kitchen back together in 1988. Nobody sent a bill. You wait right here." She came back with a thick folder soft at the edges from handling. And near the bottom of it, under the old bill of sale that showed the town selling the building to Harlan for $1, was a document Ellen had never seen, filed and stamped and recorded 7 years before, when Harlan first began to feel his own age. It was a covenant. In plain language, drawn up cheap by a lawyer 2 towns over but drawn up right, it said that the parcel at Water and Main was granted and held in perpetuity for the use and benefit of the Volunteer Fire Company of Coburn and the public safety of the town, and that it could not be sold, subdivided, or demolished for private development so long as the company's charter remained in force, and that the charter could be kept in force by a single active member or trustee. Harlan had signed it. Ruth Colby had notarized it. It had been sitting in the county's own files for 7 years, and nobody at Meridian Land Partners had thought to look past the demolition list. "He knew," Ruth said quietly, reading over Ellen's shoulder. "He knew they'd come for it after he was gone. He tied it up so they couldn't. But the company's dead," Ellen said. "He was the last one. Doesn't the charter die with him?" Ruth looked at her for a long moment. "The charter needs one trustee," she said. "One living soul willing to sign their name to it and keep it. That's all. One." She slid a second paper across the counter, a simple charter membership form, blank waiting. "He left the building to you, honey, not to his brother. To you. You ever ask yourself why?" Ellen had asked herself, on the highway, in the dark, and she had thought it was cruelty or an oversight. Now she thought of the last thing Harlan had ever said to her, in the hospital, when she'd asked him what she was supposed to do with a dead firehouse. He'd smiled, and he'd said, "You'll figure out what it's for." She had thought it was the medicine talking. "He left it to me," she said slowly, "because I'm the only one who ever asked him why he kept doing it. Everybody else in that family told him he was a fool. I used to ask him at supper, 'Why do you keep answering a bell for a town that can't even keep its own lights on?' And he never had an answer I understood." She put her hand flat on the covenant. "He was answering me. It just took him dying and me reading his book to hear it." She signed the charter form on Ruth Colby's counter. The fire company had one member again. She was still standing there when the door opened behind her and Alan Price walked in, and behind him, in a good jacket that did not fit him well, was Dale Mercer. "There you are," Price said, and the smoothness had thinned. "You didn't sign. You didn't answer your phone. I've got a crew staged for Monday, Mrs. Mercer, and a schedule that doesn't care about your feelings. Ellen." Dale would not look at the book on the counter. "Be reasonable. That man wasted his whole life on that dump. Don't you waste what's left of yours. Take the money. $4,000 is more than that heap of brick is worth and more than Harlan ever put in your hand while he was alive." Ellen turned around slowly. For half a year she had let this family talk to her like this in silence, because she had been too tired and too broken to answer. She was not too tired now. She had spent the night with the warm lamp and 40 years of her husband's true handwriting, and something in her had come back that had been gone a long time. Say his name like that again, she said quietly, and I'll put you out of this building like he'd have put out a grease fire, cold and fast, and without raising my voice. Dale's mouth opened and shut. You want to know what Harlan put in my hand? She lifted the book off the counter and held it up. 40 years. This is the Ostrowski chimney he fixed for free so a family wouldn't burn. This is the Dawes house he rebuilt the back of before the snow came, on his own dime with his own hands. This is the Reyes family, 5 of them, that he brought into that engine bay and kept warm all winter when they had nowhere else. This is your mother's kitchen, Mr. Price. No, it isn't. You're not from here. You wouldn't know. But it's Ruth's mother's kitchen. Ruth Colby nodded, her eyes wet. There are 300 nights in this book where the only thing he wrote was that he lit a lamp in the window so anybody scared out in the dark could see that somebody in this town was still awake. That's what he put in my hand. And you want me to sell it for scrap and gas money. That book's not worth the leather it's bound in, Dale said, but his voice had gone thin and defensive, and he took a step toward her. You think a bunch of old stories about chimneys is going to keep the county off? You think that pays a tax bill? You've got nothing, Ellen. You showed up here with nothing, and you're going to leave with nothing, and I'm trying. For once, somebody in this family is trying to do you a kindness and hand you $4,000. And you're too proud and too foolish to. Kindness. Ellen said the word like she was testing the weight of it. You buried your brother in February, and you stood at the hole in the ground and told the mourners he wasted his life. I was standing right behind you. You didn't know I could hear. Or you didn't care. And now you drive 2 hours to call it kindness because you thought there was money in the walls. She stepped toward him, and it was Dale who gave ground. There was never any money, Dale. There was this. He was richer than any of us, and none of you could see it, and that is the saddest thing I have ever understood about your family, and I married into it, so I get to say so. I'm his brother, Dale said, and for a second the bluster fell off him and something almost like grief showed underneath. He should have left it to blood. He left it to whoever would keep the lamp lit, Ellen said more gently now. You wanted to sell it before it was cold. That's your answer. That's why it isn't yours. Dale had no reply to that. He looked at the floor. It's condemned, Price said, stepping in to fill the silence. But he was watching Ruth now, and the folder in his arms had begun to look heavy. The county's got a covenant on file, Ruth said, dated 7 years back, recorded, notarized by me, that says this parcel can't be sold or demolished for private development as long as the fire company's charter is active. She smiled at him, 30 years of counter behind it. As of about 4 minutes ago, the charter's active. It's got a trustee. Her name's Ellen Mercer. She reached under the counter and set a photocopy on top of Price's folder. You'll want to give that to your lawyers before you pay your crew for Monday. Ellen watched the developer read it. She watched the whole shape of the thing change in his face, the easy country town, the tired widow, the pile of brick nobody would fight for. He looked up at her, and to his small credit, some of the smoothness came back real this time. You know this building will bleed you, he said. Taxes, repairs, that roof. You've got $61, Mrs. Mercer, I looked. Who's going to help you carry a dead firehouse? And that was the question, and it hung in the little office, and Ellen did not have an answer for it, because she truly did not know. The town answered for her. It did not happen all at once. It happened like water finding a crack, then a channel, then a flood. Ruth Colby made 3 phone calls that afternoon. By evening, a man named Sal Ostrowski was at the firehouse door with his 2 grown sons and a truck full of tools, and he stood in the bay and looked at the old engine a long moment before he could speak. My grandmother's chimney, he said finally. River Road. He fixed it for nothing in '86. And my dad found out what the fire brick cost and tried to pay him back, and your husband told him the only payment he'd take was that we'd do the same for somebody else someday and keep our mouths shut about it. He set his toolbox down on the concrete like a man planting a flag. I've been keeping my mouth shut for 38 years, waiting to find out who the somebody was. Turns out, it's you. Where do you want us to start?" The next morning, there were 6 people on the cracked apron. By noon, there were 15. They came like the entries in the book had come, one after another, and each one carried a piece of the same story into the bay and set it down. A gray-headed man named Boyd stopped his truck in the middle of the street and got out and just stared. "I was 9 when our house burned," he said. "We slept right there, right on that floor. I remember a harmonica." He wiped his face with the back of a big hand and did not care who saw. "You need a plumber?" "I'm a plumber. I'm your plumber now. Free, don't argue." The woman who ran the last diner on Main, whose name was Marie after the Marie in the book, though Ellen did not learn that until later, arrived at 6 the next morning with 2 thermoses of coffee and a flat of eggs, and when Ellen tried to press coins on her, she looked so offended that Ellen never tried again. "Honey," Marie said, "there is a ledger in this town, and it is not the kind with money in it, and I have been in debt on it my whole life. You let me pay a little of it back before I go." An old woman named Ada Reyes came last that day, leaning on a cane, walking slow up the middle of Water Street with a younger woman at her elbow. She would not let anyone help her over the threshold. She stood in the middle of the engine bay a long while without speaking, turning in a slow circle, looking at the high dim ceiling and the round windows and the worn place on the floor. 51 years, she finally said, so quietly the whole working crowd went still to hear her. "I was 11 years old. Our house on Cutler Street burned the week before Christmas, and we had nothing. And a man I'd never met brought us in here and put blankets down right where I'm standing and lit that coal stove, and his wife made a soup that I have tried to make my whole life and never once got right." She looked at Ellen, and her old eyes were fierce and wet. "I have not driven past this corner one single time in 51 years without saying thank you under my breath. I thought I was the only one who remembered. I thought when he died it was all going to be knocked down and paved over, and nobody would ever know a family slept warm here." Her voice cracked. "I have a grandson who roofs for a living. He is coming Saturday, and you are not going to tell him no." "No, ma'am," Helen said. "I don't believe I am." They came with the very houses he had saved standing behind them across the town. They came with ladders and shingles and a case of caulk and casseroles under foil. A retired mason looked at the back wall and said he could point the brick in a weekend. A woman who ran the last diner on Main brought coffee at 6 every morning and would not take a cent. The plywood came down off the round windows. The weeds came up out of the apron. Someone found a can of red paint and, high on a ladder, went carefully over the faded letters above the bay until Coburn Volunteer Fire Company stood out bright and certain against the brick again. Ellen worked beside them from dawn to dark, and she learned the thing Harlan had known and never managed to say, that the town had not forgotten him at all. It had only been waiting, like a banked fire waits, for one window to light so it would know it was allowed to answer back. On the 4th day, 2 young people she did not know came and stood at the edge of the apron, hesitant, lingering at the edge of something they were not sure they were allowed into. One was a girl of maybe 19 with paint on her jeans, the other a boy about the same age with a nervous jaw. They watched the work for a while before the girl worked up the courage to cross to Ellen. "Is it true?" the girl asked. "What people are saying? That this was a real fire company and that it's coming back?" "It's true," Ellen said. "One trustee so far. That's me." The girl looked at the freshly lettered brick, at the old engine rolled out into the sun with its brass half polished, at the people on the roof. "My little brother nearly died of an asthma thing last winter," she said, "and the nearest ambulance is 30 minutes out, and my mom always says if there'd been anybody here in town, anybody at all who knew what to do—" She stopped. "How do you join? Do you have to be somebody? A man, or old, or You have to be willing to answer when it's inconvenient, Ellen said. That's the whole of the qualification. My husband wrote it down somewhere close to those exact words. She looked at the two of them, so young, so uncertain, standing where 40 years of the town's rescued had stood. Are you willing? The boy spoke for the first time. My grandfather was in this company, he said. Back when. He never talked about it much, but he had a helmet in the garage, and when he passed my dad wouldn't let anybody throw it out, he swallowed. I'd like to put it on, if that's allowed. It's allowed, Ellen said, and something in her chest that had been shut a long, dark time opened a little wider. Come Saturday. Bring the helmet. We'll start a page for you in the book. Alan Price came once more, near the end of that first week, and stood on the apron among the ladders and the working people and the smell of fresh paint, and he watched for a while, and Ellen came down off the engine to meet him. My partners want the corner, he said. They'll pay well for the parcel, covenant or no covenant. Everything's got a number. Not this, Ellen said. You really believe that? I read 40 years of a man believing it. She wiped her hands on a rag. You offered me $4,000 for a pile of brick, Mr. Price, and 3 days ago I nearly took it. Because I thought that's all it was, and I thought that's all I was. Then I found out what it's for. You can't put a number on the thing that keeps people alive. That's the whole trick of it. That's why men like you always miss it in the files. He looked at the bright letters over the bay, and the 4 faded words beside the door that no one had painted over, and something passed across his face that might, in a younger man, have been the beginning of shame. Then he nodded once, and he got in his silver truck, and Meridian Land Partners did not come to Coburn again. They finished the roof on a Saturday in August. The whole town seemed to be there. Somebody had strung lights. Ada Reyes's grandson climbed down off the last ridge cap, and everyone clapped, and then a strange quiet came over the crowd, and they turned, all of them, toward Ellen, because they did not know how you finish a thing like this, and neither did she. So she did the only thing that felt right. She went up the 3 worn steps to the watchroom, alone, and she took the old oil lamp down off the desk, and she carried it back down into the bay where they could all see, and she set it in the round window that faced the street. She trimmed the wick, she filled it from the can. And with a steady hand, she set a match to it, and the warm light bloomed out into the evening as it had bloomed the first night. Only now there were 100 faces to catch the glow of it. My husband wrote something in his book, she said, and her voice carried in the quiet. On the last page, the last winter of his life, when he was the only one left and he was too sick to ring the bell, he wrote that somebody has to be the window that stays lit. That as long as one window in a town stays awake, nobody who's scared out there in the dark has to feel like the last soul alive. She looked around at them, at the Ostrowskis and the Reyes family and Ruth Colby and the Mason and the diner woman, at the houses he'd saved gathered up on 2 legs and looking back at her. I used to think he threw his life away on a town that never thanked him. I was wrong. A life isn't measured by what the world hands back to you. It's measured by who you answered when the bell rang and nobody was watching. He answered every call for 40 years, and not one of you forgot it. You just needed to see the lamp lit again to remember you were allowed to answer too. Then she reached up and she took hold of the rope that ran to the small iron bell in the cupola, the bell that had not rung in Coburn for a year and a half, and she pulled it once. Clear and bright and single, the note went out over the rooftops of the dying mill town, over the blinking yellow light and the boarded storefronts and all the houses that stood, because one quiet man had refused to let them fall. And it did not sound like an ending. The lamp stays lit, Ellen said into the ringing quiet after it, and the bell still answers. That night, after the strung lights came down and the last casserole dish was claimed and the town went home, Ellen sat alone at the watchroom desk with the lamp burning beside her and the old black book open to the first blank page after 40 years of her husband's hand. The girl with the paint on her jeans and the boy with his grandfather's helmet had signed the charter that afternoon. There were 4 names under Ellen's now, then 7 by the end of the month. She dipped the pen. For a long moment she did not know what a person was supposed to write, and then she understood that it was the same thing he had always written, only it was her turn to write it. Saturday, she put down in a careful hand that did not yet look like it belonged in that book, but would. Finished the roof. The whole town came. Ada Reyes's grandson set the last ridge cap, signed 4 new members, lit the lamp. Then she sat back and read it over, and it was true, every word, and no one had paid her for a syllable of it, and she thought that Harlan would have liked that fine. She kept the firehouse. She lives in the watchroom to this day, and the oil lamp burns in that street window every single night, and the Coburn Fire Company has 11 members now, young ones, who found their way to the corner of water in Maine because a light was on. When a hard winter comes and somebody's furnace dies, they know where to go. When a family loses a roof, the company frames a new one before the snow, and there is a thick black book on the desk, its cover marked with one word in an old man's hand, and there are new entries in it now, in a woman's writing, because somebody should keep the record that a town this small was held up, and by whom, and at what cost, and for free. Here is the truth Ellen Mercer drove 300 miles to sell for scrap and stayed to learn instead. The world will look at your whole quiet life and price it at nothing, just as the county priced that firehouse at $0 and put it on a list to be knocked down. The world is wrong. The ugliest, most overlooked building on the block is so often the one that has been keeping everyone alive. And the same is true of people. You are not worthless because no one has thanked you. You are a lamp still burning in someone's dark window, whether you can see them or not, and one day they will remember, and they will come, and they will carry you the way you carried them. So light your lamp, answer your bell, do the good that no one sees, because someone always, in the end, remembers. If this story warmed something in you tonight, stay with me. There's a new one here every week, and each one is a lamp left burning in the window for whoever needs it. And before you go, do me one small kindness and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Leave the name of your town so the rest of us know another window is lit. Because the lamp stays on here, and this bell still answers for you.